Welcome to The Writer Reads Mack and Me, an Odyssey, Book 2, Mack and Me, Blaedergil's Host, Chapter 28, Recovery. I woke to a raging thirst, a splitting headache, and the feeling that someone had used every inch of me as a drum. When I worked out which motherfucking asshole was responsible, I was going to. Why was I lying down? I tried to sit up and found the sheets tucked too tightly around me to allow it. What the? And I sounded like I'd been gargling gravel. I stopped trying to move, closed my eyes, swallowed, and listened to the sounds around me. The last thing I remembered, I had been in a laboratory. There'd been things to shoot at, and I'd been starting to feel like crap. Okay. And then things started coming into focus. Delight had been with me, and Odyssey had come, and they'd shot me with a glazer set to stun. My glazer. Well, fuck. And someone had been about to give me a shot, and I'd been infected. Double fuck. In fact, double all the fucks. I still felt too tired to punch anybody. And aren't we all just very glad to hear that? The Odyssey commander came into view. She stood by the bed looking down at me, frowning, and it dawned on me that I really didn't like the expression on her face. Mac? I asked, turning my head to look for him. But she reached down and took my chin between her finger and her thumb, turning my head so I had to look up at her. He'll be fine. You and Delight got the solution out in time. Solution? I hope she meant the cure, although, come to think of it, that had been a solution of sorts. Tens, the ship, Doc, also fine. I pushed against the covers, trying to loosen them. I really wanted to sit up now. The commander reached down, and I thought she was going to force me to lie still. It surprised me when she helped me sit and handed me a glass of water. Thanks, I said, looking around to see where I was. Well, it wasn't Mack's ship, unless he'd repurposed one of the holds. Nope, this wasn't a hold. It's an infirmary. The commander caught my frown as she answered the question I hadn't asked, and then she answered my confusion. Delight patched me directly through to your implant when relaying what you were doing was too hard to coordinate with shooting things. That sounded like Delight. Priorities, right? And no respect for a girl's privacy. Except her own, the commander told me. Well, that made perfect sense. She around? I asked, scanning the beds I could see. The commander shifted slightly and indicated the bed next to mine. She's still sleeping. You sure? I asked, because it was hard to believe I'd wake up before Delight. We had to hit her twice, the commander said, and I knew she was referring to the stun shots they delivered from my glazer. You dialed the power down a little bit too low. That was even a thing? For some reason, that thought made her frown even harder. We didn't cover it in training? I thought about it, then remembered we'd trained with a different brand. Not on the equipment we used in basics. And she nodded as though that explained everything. By which I understood she was making notes, and what I said would be passed back to the Odyssey training centers. It made sense. The Glazer was one of the weapons found galaxy-wide, being small, versatile, easy to use, and readily available. That and the stun setting was damn handy to have on an otherwise lethal weapon. Exactly. For a minute she looked like she was going to add something else, but then her eyes shifted and she smiled a greeting to someone moving across the ward toward us. Doctor, she said, they're starting to wake up. Thank you, Commander. I'll take it from here. Well, that was a dismissal if ever I'd heard one, but the commander was having none of it. I think I'll hang around, the commander told him in a tone that warned against argument. I saw the man's pace check, and then he shrugged and continued moving toward us. Fine, make yourself useful then and get her to the head. Head? Naval term for SAN unit? Since when did Kostrel have a navy? It doesn't, kid, but he's one of us. We're not taking chances with the way clan loyalties work here. Yeah, that made sense. Of course, Odyssey had a navy. Now, why hadn't I thought of that when I was thinking luxury cruise liners? We don't advertise our military arm, the commander said, and now you've been told we might just have to kill you. I froze, and she started smirking. Considering I'd been threatened with being thrown out an airlock and hadn't been told the threat had been rescinded, I didn't think she was funny. That thought wiped the smile from her face. Sorry, kid. I didn't know. She hadn't known? How could she not have known? Since I haven't had to deal with you and no one's passed me your files yet. Now that sounded like an order if I'd ever heard one. I followed her look and saw that Delight's eyes were open. She met the commander's gaze and closed her eyes. Not for long, though. Done, she said when she opened them again, and the commander stood still, her grip tightening on my arm. Hard to believe everyone thinks you're that much trouble. Behind her, Delight started coughing, but it sounded like a poor attempt at laughing to me. You haven't known her long enough. I flipped her a mental finger, and the commander's grip tightened. Keep it clean, she said, and then tugged on my arm. Let's get you to the head before there's a queue. Now that sounded like a good idea to me. I looked for Mack as we passed between the long rows of beds that had been set up on the concourse. It worried me when I didn't see him. Had they taken him back to the ship? And if so, why not me? He's around, the commander said, keeping me moving when I would have come to a panicked stop. No one got returned to a ship while they were sick. Don't sweat it. At least she was talking to me from the outside of my head, even if she was answering the questions almost as fast as I thought them. We headed into the public sand facility that opened up off the concourse, and I understood why they might have set up the infirmary where they had. Pretty much, the commander said. Lots of space, plenty of access to the facilities we knew we'd need, and it allowed a higher ratio of patients to care, which we needed given the clan personnel had also been hit by the virus. So you took over the station? The commander shrugged. Pretty much. Didn't they protest? We showed them the charges they had pending. The commander guided me to a cubicle and opened the door. I take it you can manage this by yourself? Yeah, thanks. And I closed the door between us. It didn't help that I knew she was waiting outside the door, but I didn't argue. I needed the sand time. I could look for Mac later. In the end, I didn't need to. Mac was lounging against the wall as we came out of the facility. It looked like he'd managed to ditch whatever escort he was supposed to have just so he could wait for me. Nope, he said. I just convinced them I wouldn't move until the commander arrived, and then I'd go wherever she told me. I made a mental note to look for an Odyssey staffer sporting a black eye, and the commander snickered. Hey! But Mac didn't sound at all offended. He fell into step beside us and then sat on the bed on the other side of mine. The realization that he hadn't been very far away made some of the uneasiness I'd been feeling go away. I let myself be maneuvered back into the bed and didn't want to lie down. I noticed that Mac didn't lie down either. I looked across at him, aware that the commander had taken a seat between Delight and I. Why we warranted such attention I didn't know, and I really didn't care. I figured not much was going to happen with Mac around. Well, that's what I was hoping. Funny, Cutter. But Mac didn't sound very amused. I rolled my eyes. That man was never amused. If he'd had a sense of humour ever, it looked like it had been removed some time ago. Yeah, and you're so funny yourself, Max said, and I tried to ignore the sounds of amusement coming from the direction of Delight and her commander. It was time to change the subject. So, what's next? I asked, and just like that, I had my captain back. Your captain? Mac wanted to know, but I ignored that too. To my surprise, it was the commander who answered. We still have to retrieve Malari. Max stared at her, and she continued. She wasn't at the lodge. She'd been there, but she'd been moved, and judging from what we found there, she'd been moved in one hell of a hurry. We're working on a location now, but whatever we do, it's going to have to be fast and subtle. She paused, frowning. You can do subtle, can't you? She's got you there, boss. Tan said, and we looked over to see him crossing the room. They cleared the ship while you were sleeping and we finished decontamination. The crew? Mack asked. All good, and that includes the kid and his dog. Damn critter didn't leave him the whole time he was down. I guess they meant Rowan and regretted not having found the time to see him since being dragged back on board. The dog was a legacy of the last time I'd run a mission with Mack, except it had been Rowan's idea to go into Ghoul's complex and find it. We'd needed it, and then we hadn't. But it had needed us, and Rowan had adopted it. Tens had not been impressed. Still not impressed, kiddo, he said, coming to stand at the foot of my bed. But it keeps the boy steady, so we let it stay. That last was said with a glance over at Mack, but Mack said nothing, and I didn't pursue it. Malari, Mack said, bringing us back to the topic at hand. Tens, liaise with the commander there to help them find her. The commander opened her mouth, and I thought she was going to argue, but then she nodded. Go do what you can, she said. Let me know if you find her before we do. You do that, and the mission's yours. Tens nodded to her, and then cast a look at Mack. I wasn't privy to whatever passed between them, but watched as Tens nodded a second time, and then turned to thread his way between the beds between him and the concourse entry. He was moving awfully smoothly for someone who'd been infected. He had Doc, Mack said, and they got the cure out to the crew before it reached a lot of the station. Including wherever he'd been, I thought, and caught Mack's almost imperceptible nod. We both looked up when the Odyssey doctor arrived to check us over. You need to rest, he said, or I'm not going to release you for whatever little jaunt she's putting you up to. And he included the commander in a glare that would have done Doc proud. The two of them must have attended the same medical school. Either that or doctors were issued with a standard glare of disapproval on graduation. He saw to Mack first and then turned to me. Right, he said, and went over me with a clinical thoroughness that made me breathe a sigh of relief when he was done. Lie down and get some sleep. If you continue to improve at this rate, I'll let you go back to your ship. What about my mission? The commander asked, and the look he gave her was beyond disapproving. We'll see, he said, and his tone said the subject was closed for discussion. He took a step away from us and then appeared to notice Delight. Ah, he said, then added, I take it she'll be needed too? If she can. The doctor sighed and moved to examine Delight's recovery, but not before looking over at me and frowning. Either you lie down and sleep on your own, or I give you an assist. He didn't tell me I had until he'd finished his examination of Delight, but then he didn't need to. I figured that bit out all by myself.